Okay, my name is Shannon and I work in the newspapers and family history team here at the library. Thanks so much for joining us today for our first ever webinar on Trove's government gazettes. You should hopefully see on the screen in front of you the Royal Coat of Arms of the Monarchy of the United Kingdom. It usually appears on the front page of the historic government gazettes, which you'll see on Trove. Australia was granted a coat of arms featuring the kangaroo and emu in 1908, but the Royal Coat of Arms was still used in the Commonwealth Government Gazette right up until the 25th of June 1925 when the kangaroo and emu replaced it. Today we'll be covering quite a lot. Let's take a look at what we'll be going over. Hopefully you'll walk away from today's session with a nice overview of government gazettes. We'll scratch the surface about what information can be found in the gazettes, why should we be searching them. We'll be taking a look at the gazettes which are currently on Trove, and we'll delve into very basic search techniques. This will hopefully be a shorter webinar than our Trove for Family History webinar, which went for over an hour. We won't be repeating some of the content in the Trove for Family History webinar, which delves into some more advanced search techniques and other things such as text correcting and using lists and tags. So if you haven't already looked at it, take a gander at it. You can view all of our past webinars on the library's YouTube channel. So what are government gazettes? Because the words government and gazettes don't sound terribly exciting, especially when you put them next to each other. A gazette is an official publication created for the purpose of notifying the public of the actions and decisions of the government. All Australian governments, including Commonwealth, state and territory governments, publish official gazettes, and they're usually published every 7 days. Many of you are probably already aware that many historic newspapers are also called gazettes. That's because the word gazette comes from gazzetta, a Venetian coin used to buy early Italian newspapers. The word for the coin became a name for newspapers themselves. Sometimes early newspapers had the function of a government gazette, which can make things even more confusing. Many early newspapers featured notices written by the government. The Sydney Gazette and New South Wales Advertiser, which you can find amongst Trove's collection of newspapers, is one of the most famous examples of this. This newspaper was actually a government publication, serving as a mouthpiece of the government from its first issue in 1803. The New South Wales Government Gazette wasn't published until almost 30 years later in 1832. So if you're looking for Government Gazette notices for New South Wales prior to 1832, you'll need to search the Sydney Gazette and New South Wales Advertiser, which again is available online via Trove newspapers. So gazettes are the official mouthpieces of the government, which might make you immediately go, why should I search through the Gazette? What can I find that is useful or relevant to me in my research? Remember, information published in government gazettes covers all aspects of government business, including orders and decisions that affect the lives of everyday people. Gazettes even contain information about individuals, including convicts. Gazettes are especially good for researching convicts. They often contain notices about a convict obtaining a ticket of leave, a certificate of freedom, or there could be a notice about a convict absconding from their employment and subsequently having their ticket of leave cancelled. On the right of the screen over here, you can see a notice from the New South Wales Government Gazette about a runaway convict. Sometimes you might even find notices of a convict being assigned. If you have family that weren't British subjects arriving into Australia, you might find notices of them obtaining their certificate of naturalisation, which later became the certificate of Australian citizenship. Gazettes are also excellent for employment notices for public servants, such as teachers and police. You can sometimes trace a person's entire career in the public service through the government gazettes, and we'll talk a bit more about this later. Some information about employment can be quite detailed. Here's an example of a list of individuals employed in railways and tramways in New South Wales in 1900. You can see what capacity people were employed in, where they worked, and how much they are paid each day. Not just interesting for those doing their family history, but also historians and train enthusiasts as well. And as well as general employment notices, you also get professional registers. Here's a register of medical practitioners for 1908, and you can see it's quite detailed. It has information about when a person was first registered as a medical practitioner, their qualifications, and the town they lived in, sometimes their address. So if you want to know whether there was a doctor in your town or maybe you had a doctor in the family, check the Gazettes. You'll also find information about businesses, bankrupt, bought and sold, extended and closed, in the Gazettes. There are even notices about when a business partnership has dissolved. A very common thing you might come across when searching for somebody's name in a Gazette is a list of unclaimed letters. These sorts of notices used to be published every single month. The library receives a number of inquiries from people who have searched through Trove and have come across these notices somewhere. So here's a list just over here on the left. They're usually wondering what happened to the letter. The answer to what happened to the letter was actually also published in the Government Gazette. In 1852, there were so many unclaimed letters lying at the Sydney Post Office waiting to be collected, about 70,000 letters in fact, that the Postage Act was amended so that those letters lying about unclaimed, taking up space, could be destroyed, but not before anything of value was removed and became part of the revenue of the Crown. You'll often find criminal reward notices. Convicts were occasionally encouraged to turn snitch for the promise of a conditional pardon, as you can see here, which is quite a big reward. And rewards for the capture of bushrangers also pop up. On the right here is a notice about a reward for the capture of the bushranger Captain Thunderbolt, who has had a few books written about him, most famously perhaps by Carol Baxter, genealogist and historian. The notice states that Thunderbolt escaped from custody on Cockatoo Island on the 11th of September 1864 and was still at large over a year later. You can see the government has gotten desperate to capture him and have upped his bounty by a whopping £75. Military notices such as appointments and awards, retirements and transfers. The Gazettes can be quite good for researching the British Army in Australia, and some of the descriptions of the soldiers can be quite detailed. As you can see an example for Samuel Baker up here in the top right of the screen. The notice contains information that would be a boon to somebody researching him, such as parish of birth, occupation, and other details such as information about his physical appearance. It's not all about rewards and promotions though. With the carrot comes a stick, and you do also find notices about desertion, severe reprimands, fines, and courts-martial issued to military personnel in the Gazettes. Okay, land notices including acquisition, disposal, and transfers of property, leases granted, but also notices about an ancestor who didn't pay their rates, went into default, and then had their land sold at auction appear in the Gazettes. Here we can see a notice that Cobb & Co renewed their lease over some Crown land at Timberbongi, which I had a mail station at the bottom of the screen just here. And up here we can see a Commonwealth Gazette notice about the naming of the Patrick White Terrace, which is a strip of lawn just outside the library. Gazettes are very useful for understanding the orders of the government that a person might have lived under. On the left is a notice from 1866, which authorised police officers to collect the electoral roll. You can find a lot of follow-up letters published in newspapers from citizens who were worried about the police knocking on their doors. People didn't like it. On the right, you can see a government order about what would happen when a female convict married either a free settler or another convict. Would the female convict still live with her assigned employer when she got married? Would she be assigned to a husband if he were a free settler? There was apparently a lot of confusion about what would happen, so to clarify it, the government placed a notice in the Gazette. So you can see why gazettes are an excellent source of information, not only for family historians, but any person with any sort of interest in Australian history. They often contain information which you might not come across in a newspaper, and the information is from the government. Today we're going to be focusing on government gazettes that are available via the library's Trove service, which includes the New South Wales Government Gazette from 1832, the Commonwealth of Australia Gazette, which dates from Federation in 1901. The pre-independence gazettes for Papua New Guinea are also available on Trove. PNG attained independence on the 16th of September 1975, and the gazettes go right up to the day before on Trove. So if you are researching Australia's administration of Papua New Guinea or had family in PNG, these gazettes are certainly worth a look through. So to get to the government gazettes on Trove, you can either pop Trove into Google or go to our homepage, and Trove is right here under Getting Started. So if you just click on that there, it should bring up Trove. And under here, you'll see all the different zones of Trove: digitised newspapers and more, government gazettes, journals, articles, books, pictures, photos, object, the works. But today we're going to be focusing on government gazettes. So we just click on that one there. And now we've limited any further interactions on Trove to government gazettes. Just like newspapers, there are two ways of looking through gazettes. The first is browsing. And we can browse to the first page of a gazette quite easily. So you'll see down here, browse. I generally start browsing by place rather than title. Gazette titles change over time, and every time a gazette gets a new title, it gets a new record on Trove. But if I just wanted to search Commonwealth gazettes here, I'd pick place and I'd pick national. You'll see here a bunch of letters will show up. We can click on any of them. Again, you'll see a lot of results. A lot of them are just title changes, but a lot of them are separate gazettes. As you can see here, if we click on C, you can see there are a lot of gazettes on here. Some of them are no longer published. Some of them only had a very short life. The reason for this is that in 1974, the Commonwealth Gazette was becoming such a big document that it was split up. And you can see here on this page on A, Australian Government Gazette 1973, but then after that, we've got all these different sections from 1974 onwards. The General Gazette, Periodic Gazette, the Public Service Gazette, and the Special Gazette, which relates to a single matter that required urgent publication. Some of these titles you're probably never going to bother with unless you have a very specific interest. Many of the titles are published periodically as required by a specific piece of legislation. The Chemical Gazette contains notices about businesses that have been issued assessment and permits, new chemical reports, plus other updates. The Gazette is published on the first Tuesday of every month as required by the Industrial Chemicals Act of 1989. So it's a very specific interest that you might have if you were searching through that. Otherwise, to navigate and continue browsing, you just click on the one that you want. And you can see that Trove makes it quite easy to keep funneling us down by year, by month, and by date. We can click view this item to view the page. And here we are viewing the page in Trove. And you can see on the first page of this Gazette, it actually tells you what each of those different sections of the Gazette were published for and what might be contained in them. So Special Gazette, Periodic Gazette, General, and Public Service. When browsing, you do need to know rather exactly when something is published in a Gazette, which might be the case if you have details from an index, such as a date of publication or year of publication and a page number. If you've ever used newspapers, the screen here looks very similar to that. And all of the functions are pretty much the same. You can see here we can turn to the next page. We can browse pages to go back to that screen there. And just click through. Over here you can download an article or page or issue, and you can print as well. Just like in Trove, when viewing an article in the Gazettes, over here you will notice this text over here, which is machine read text. So when a Gazette is uploaded to Trove, a machine goes through, it reads what's in the Gazette over here and translates it into text over here. So this is machine read text. The whole process is called optical character recognition. And you can see this one's pretty accurate. But sometimes you do find a lot of mistakes when the machine has translated the text in the Gazette to this machine read text over here. And we'll talk more about that a bit later. So that's browsing. Again, you do sort of need to know exactly what you're after for that to be useful. The way most of you will probably use the Trove Gazettes to find information isn't by browsing, but rather by keyword searching. Again, we'll just be covering the very basics of searching today, but we do delve into search techniques more fully in the Trove for Family History webinar. The best way to search Trove is to start broad and refine. So all I'm going to do here in the search bar is pop in a name in quotation marks. By putting Oscar Adnam in quotation marks, I'm telling Trove to search for a phrase or those two words when they are next to each other, as you'd expect to be the case with a name. If you've ever done an advanced search for a phrase, which I never really use, but it's just over here. And if we search for a phrase, you can see it's just done the same thing. All it's done is put the name in quotation marks. And you can see we've got 3 results for an Oscar Adnam. You can see here we've got results from other Trove zones, so digitised newspapers and more. There's no results for books, pictures, journals, music, etc. There is a list by somebody who has an article or something that mentions Oscar Adnam. So you can see we have 3 results from our phrase search, but I can make my search more effective. What I'm going to do now is add a little squiggly line called a tilde. The tilde is usually just below the escape bar on the keyboard, and I'm going to add the number 2. And you can see our results have jumped from 3 to 14. And this search includes all of the results from the previous search. That's because adding the tilde 2 at the end of our phrase has given us results where the words may be in reverse order. So you can see we've got Oscar Leonard Adnam, but we've also got Adnam, Oscar Leonard. So it's really necessary, whether you're doing an advanced search or just putting in the quotation marks yourself, to add that tilde 2 to the end of your phrase. An important thing to keep in mind when searching the Gazettes is that a person might not always be mentioned by their full name either. Remember, this is a government publication, so use of initials is quite common. We can see Oscar's middle name is Leonard. So his initials may be in the Gazette as O.L. Adnam. I can actually search for Oscar Adnam and O.L. Adnam at the same time quite easily by doing what's called a Boolean search. So all I'm going to do to find articles that mention Oscar Adnam or O.L. Adnam, let's do another phrase search over here. Same way I've done it the first time. And in between them, put or. So I'm looking for articles that mention Oscar Adnam or O.L. Adnam. And we click search. So now you can see that we've got 17 results on the screen. So we've gone from 3 to 17. This technique is also quite useful for searching across articles where somebody might be mentioned by a nickname as well, or an assumed name such as a name they might have adopted, whether by deed poll or informally, or through something like marriage. And if we look through our results here, we can see that we can very easily trace Mr. Adnam's long and very distinguished career in the public service through notices of appointments and promotions. And examinations. We can sort by relevance over here, or by year, latest first, or earliest first. So earliest year of publication of a notice about Oscar is 1923. But I tend to use a refiner results over here on the left of the screen. And it's very interesting, some of the patterns that we can see over here. You can see that Oscar is mentioned quite a lot in the National or the Commonwealth of Australia Gazette. He's only mentioned once in the New South Wales Government Gazette. Okay, and there's the various titles there. You can see different categories of notices in the Gazette. The Trove team just last week published an excellent blog that delves more into these categories. They're pretty self-explanatory, but the blog is really worth a read to get a nice overview of what each of these categories mean and what exactly it's going to mean when you limit your search by clicking on any one of them. We can click decade to refine our search to specific decades, years and months. And again, I always find this quite interesting because we can see how many mentions Oscar gets in a particular span of years or decade. So let's hunt for the first mentions of Oscar in the Gazettes by limiting our search to 1920, 1929. We could see here there's a mention every couple of years. And we can click on 1923, which seems to be the very earliest mention of Oscar in the Gazette. And you can see we've just got 2 entries here now. The first entry here, you can see from the title, is an examination for appointment as telegraph messenger. And if we click on it, we can see details in the notice here. So it's examination results. And you can see here that Mr. Adnam did very well in his exams. You can see which district he was residing in 1923. So you see, even something as boring sounding as a Government Gazette entry helps us to paint a picture of somebody's life and the requirements to work as a telegraph messenger in the 1920s. Okay, we'll just go back. The other entry is the other result from our search is for an index page. Okay, so you can see some of the details of when something was published under here. So you can see that our notice for Oscar for his examination results was published on page 1894 of the Commonwealth of Australia Gazette. And we could see the index page here. We can see his name is mentioned as O.L. Adnam, not Oscar Leonard. You just click on that. If we look over here, the machine read text or the OCR text, you see there's two Adnams mentioned, possibly a brother or another relation, because it's quite a unique surname. We can see the name highlighted in yellow, and if we look at the background, it says off page. This means that the Gazette entry appears on another page, not on the page in front of us. That's because of the way that Trove has indexed the notice. To view the page that mentions O.L. Adnam, we simply scroll up. And we can see up here that the notice which mentions him is continued on page 44. So we can just give that a click. We could see over here, O.L. Adnam. And we could see that a notice about him was published on page 2017 of the Gazette for 1923. So this is an index. You can see it's a staff list of permanent officers, so it's an index to notices in the Gazette. And it's saying that there's a notice about O.L. Adnam on page 2017 of the Gazette for that year. If we go back to our search results for 1923, remember the only other result that we had for that year was for page 1894. So where is our 2017 result that we saw in the index? It's quite easy to browse to the section of, or to a specific page published in the Gazette. So for this, we might need to do that. Just click browse up here. Okay, click 1923, remember we're just funneling down. Now we just need to find page 2017. So September was page 1894. So I suspect it'll be somewhere in October. We can see going up 1901 to 1924. 1925 to 1952. Keep going a bit further along. That's too far. Okay. 1989 to 2020. And we're just looking for page 2017. And we can click here, view this page. O.L. Adnam should be mentioned somewhere on this page. We can click here. To view the article. And we can see here, Oscar Leonard Adnam. Now this didn't come up from our keyword search of the Gazettes, and I suspect the reason why might be over here. Central staff. So we're just going to have a look through here. So he's right at the top of the page, and we'll go down. we can see that the machine read text has misread his name. Not as Oscar Leonard Adnam, but Oscar Leonard Adnaru. I can go through and fix that. We're not going to cover that today. But you can go through and fix it yourself by clicking here, fix or review this text. And you can see why from this example that indexes are so important and why we shouldn't just be relying on keyword searches. If you know something was published in a particular year, but you can't find it from a keyword search, try and search an index if there is one. As I mentioned, indexes for the Gazettes are usually published on the last day of the year or in the last issue of the Gazette. Sometimes you might also access Gazette indexes on microfiche or through other services such as Find My Past or Ancestry.com. I love a good index. They're always worth investigating. So we'll just go back. Don't forget when you are searching through Trove to keep your eye on other zones such as newspapers. Remember, there may be additional details published in newspapers that complement the Gazette entry. So if we click on newspaper, digitized newspapers and more zone, we can see a bunch of articles about Oscar from 1923 when he first joined the post office. And you can see down here, there's actually an article about it. In school notes, we just click on that, we can give it a read. Trove's very slow right now. I suspect it's a little bit of lunchtime traffic. Without waiting for the newspaper to load, if we look at the machine read text over here, which is pretty accurate by the look of it, we can see that Oscar has left school to take up a position in the local post office, and that he's following in the footsteps of two elder brothers who have graduated to high positions in service through the Aberdeen office. The article also says he's bright, alert, intelligent, and should render a good account of himself in the postal service. Okay, so we've seen mention of Oscar in the Gazettes at the beginning of his career, and now we're going to try and find a Gazette notice about him at the very end of his career. So we're going to get rid of our limits up here. We're going to go back to government gazettes now and out of newspapers. And we're going to refine our results to see what mention we can get of about Oscar towards the end of his career. So you can see here, there's a bit of activity in the 1960s to 1969. And there's one Gazette entry in 1970 through to 1979. So we'll just click on that to see what the latest mention is. And we can see here one government Gazette notice published on Thursday, the 25th of June, 1970. We can just click on that. Again, he's not mentioned on the page that we're on, but if we go up here, we can see his name is highlighted. Scroll up the page. Way, way up. Nearly there. Here we are. Continued on page 3916. So we can just click on that. If we go down here, we can see that Mr. Oscar Leonard Adnam, former postmaster grade 2 of Aberdeen, New South Wales, was awarded the British Empire Medal for public service. We'll leave Oscar for now because I wanted to take a quick look at convicts before we wrap up. As I mentioned before, the Gazettes are an excellent source of information regarding convicts. It really is a matter of doing a phrase search of the name of the convict with the name of the ship they arrived on. Usually in a Gazette, the name of the ship appears after the name of a convict. So you could try Boolean searching, and we'll search for the convict. Whoop. Jane Ball. And the name of the ship that she arrived on. And to include that word, we're just going to use a Boolean expression and include the name of the ship that she arrived in to Australia on. Okay, so we can see again, she's mentioned surname first, given name last. So that stresses the importance of including that. And there, straight after her name, is the name of the ship. So we can see that she was assigned in 1832. Now that we know she arrived around that time, we can limit our search to a decade, the 1830s, to see what other articles or notices in the Gazette there might be about her. And you can see that there's quite a few. Sometimes if I'm getting a lot of results, if a convict has a very common name, like Henry Sutton, I just include the name of the ship as part of the phrase. We can see here all kinds of articles about him. Because the name of the ship is usually mentioned straight after the name of the convict, it's a useful way to search for them. You don't have to search for particular convicts either. If you're interested in broader information, such as what a convict might have eaten or what their rations were, you could just type in something like convict rations. And you can see here a lot of articles around or notices around 1839. And if we click on one of them, see that there was a scarcity of flour in 1839. So convicts had some beef and pork substituted as part of their rations. That's the very basics of searching through government gazettes. And now we're going to head back to our slide for some final tips and tricks before we wrap up. And the first tip is to remember all of the techniques that you would use when searching newspapers, most of them can be applied to the Gazettes. So take a look at our webinar, Trove for Family History, if you haven't done so already. And a really important tip is to start with what you know. Any good search relies on you having at least some knowledge. For example, a person's occupation, dates when they're employed in a particular job, and where they were living can be found through other sources of information, such as electoral rolls, directories, newspapers. This information can be essential when you're doing a keyword search of a Gazette, as it would be in a newspaper. Boolean searching is an excellent way to limit your search. So we saw earlier how I limited my search to articles about the convict Henry Sutton, who arrived aboard the Albion. But we also saw how I used expressions, the Boolean terms or and to include words that may relate to a specific person and to limit my search. Use a Gazette index when it's available. Remember the pitfalls of relying solely on OCR or machine read text. Search engines usually aren't as reliable as a nice index, compiled either by a family historian or within the Government Gazette itself. The Commonwealth of Australia Gazette Index may be bound separately or bound with the General Gazette, depending on the date. Most state and territory Gazette indexes are found within the Gazette itself. Remember that what gets published in a Gazette might change over time. What the government is required to notify in a Gazette one year might not be required the next year. The Public Service Gazette, for example, used to notify of resignation and retirements. So if you look through the historic Gazettes on Trove, you will find these kind of notices. But retirements and resignations generally won't be found in more recently published Gazettes because the requirement about what gets notified changed. The best way to see what's recorded in a Gazette is to search through it. Just have a play around a bit. Trying to track down the rules about what decisions need to be notified in a Gazette can be quite tricky. Here, the Public Service Regulations 1999, Section 3.12 clearly set out what action needs to be recorded in the Australian Public Service Gazette, but sometimes that information can be quite tricky to track down. For more information on Gazettes and how to access them, be sure to check out our research guide on government Gazettes, which is just on our webpage. Not all historic Gazettes are online, and some which are online aren't available via Trove. So if we click here, we go to our website. You can browse all of our research guides here. They're all sorted alphabetically. We can just go G for government gazettes. You'll see here a list of states and territories. We can click, for example, on Victoria. It'll tell you how to access the current Gazette, which is available from 1998. And it'll also tell you how to access the historic editions of the Gazette. So they're online, just not via Trove, from 1836 to 1997. So if we click there, we can go to their website. It's a bit different, the search function compared to Trove. You can just pop in a name here. It'll hopefully bring up a result. And here we are. We can see that there's a Gazette notice for an Alabaster Thomas who had his conditional pardon approved. And we can actually click on that and view the digitised document. Oh, look, another Adnam. It is worth checking the research guides on the state and territory library website, as some of them have information about government gazettes for their particular state or territory, which might be useful. And remember, there are plenty of ways of interacting with Trove and keeping up to date. I've come across some great tips for searching Gazette on Trove Facebook and Twitter pages. The Trove blogs, which are published regularly, sometimes have useful information on government gazettes. As I mentioned, the most recent blog entry, published just last week, has information about the different categories of notices in gazettes, which is well worth a read. If you're feeling stuck along the way with your research, just remember, we here at the library are always here to help. You can contact us using our Ask a Librarian form just down here on our website. Just click that to contact us via our form. Otherwise, that concludes today's session. Thanks so much for joining us. Does anybody have any questions?
Great, thank you, Shannon, for that really excellent session today. We have had a few questions come through. There was a comment in the chat about the different states, and I think you covered that quite well, which is going to the different states website and looking at our research guide to just see, just because it's not on Trove doesn't mean it's not online.
Yeah, not all of the historic gazettes are online. Sometimes you just get an index. Sometimes they're digitised elsewhere. I think Queensland historic issues are available via Text Queensland. So, yeah.
So one of the first questions was, does the New South Wales Gazette have information about New South Wales or all states?
So it does cover some of the other states for certain periods. I think it covers Victoria for certain periods and also Queensland. It depends on the date.
All right. Another one, Juliana asked, would you recommend that searches are repeated every now and then to pick up material that is corrected later?
Yeah, I certainly would. So that's something I do quite often, is redo my own searches in Gazettes in case somebody's gone and corrected something like a name. You have to remember people are always going through and text correcting. Newspapers, the same is true for Gazettes. So yeah, certainly would recommend that.
Great. And she has a few follow-up questions as well. Do the current Gazettes still contain the same level of detail? And you did touch on that towards the end.
Yeah, that's right. So as I mentioned, what gets recorded in a Gazette changes over time. So a very good example is notices about resignations and retirements are no longer recorded in the Public Service Gazette. They used to be, but if you think about it, it makes sense that they're no longer recorded. If I choose to retire or resign, that's my decision, not the government's. So that's why it's no longer recorded.
Great. All right. So Rob asks, in newspapers, the string of characters searched for is normally highlighted in colour on the left-hand side once a page is open. Does this also happen in Gazettes?
Yes, that's correct. So a useful way to get rid of that. Let's see if I go to Gazettes again, is to click on the little eye over here. You can see it's highlighted in yellow here, highlighted in yellow here. To get rid of it, we can click on details over here, little eye symbol. And we can click on article identifier. And that should get rid of all of the yellow highlighted text.
Great. Joanna asks again, I wonder about the OCR of the indexes and if we're waiting for this to improve too. So this does touch on the correction, text correction as well?
Yeah, that's right, which we've covered in our Trove for Family History webinar. It's reasonably accurate, and I found especially reasonably accurate for Gazettes where it's a consistent sort of type font, but you can always correct the text in an article.
All right, great. And this is the last one and quite a good question. So Mark asks, are there any National Library staff available for assistance if I'm using Trove in the National Library? Yeah,
so if you're using Trove, if you're in the library, you can always come up and ask staff at the desk for any assistance. Otherwise, if you're not at the library, the best way to contact us is to use our Ask a Librarian form for assistance here. And you can fill out an inquiry form. We aim to respond within 5 working days. I'd use that instead of the contact us form on the Trove help page, which is just up here.
All right, great. So that was our last question today. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'll just jump back to the PowerPoint. So we do have an upcoming learning webinar for copyright for genealogists, if you haven't already. But thank you again for joining us. Thank you for Shannon for that great session and answering everyone's questions. And hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Goodbye.